Welcome Atul Dikshit sir. On
you.
behalf of Department of Mathematics and Ganit Mandal, I welcome you. This is the first time that we are meeting here, and unfortunately, we are meeting on in online mode. But still, we are very glad to meet you here. Regarding today's lecture, that on the 134th birth anniversary of Ramanujan sir, okay, we are celebrating this Maths Day celebration in Department of Mathematics. Okay, so I welcome all the participants who are attending the lecture as well as celebrating this event with us. So I welcome all of us, all of you, and I welcome Atul Dikshit sir specially and for taking his time from his busy schedule. Actually, we were thinking whether you could accept our invitation or not, but Joshi sir felt at least we should ask, and then you replied well, and so thanks a lot for that. And yeah, it's our pleasure to have you in this event. So thanks a lot. Over to Joshi sir now. Joshi sir, can you guide the students?
Yeah, thank you, Dhotre sir. Today we are here to celebrate the National Mathematics Day to mark the birth day of legendary mathematician Ramanujan. And in fact, we have chosen a very right person who is working in the area of Ramanujan. And in fact, it is my pleasure to share the information that this year he received the Suvarna Jayanti Fellowship also for his marvelous work in number theory. He received research fellowships and Batman Prize in number theory and graduate student fellowship and many more to his credit. In fact, he also delivered a Hansraj Gupta Memorial Award lecture at Indian Mathematical Society's annual conference also. So with this very brief introduction, I request Atul Dikshit sir to deliver his talk. Over to sir, you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dhotre, Dr. Joshi, for inviting me to this talk. It's my pleasure. I have been coming to Pune University since I was in college, to Pune University and to Bhaskaracharya Pratishthan in particular. So I'm a resident of Dombivli, and all of my relatives are mostly from Pune. So I keep coming to Pune very frequently. So let me share the screen. Yeah, can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, sure. So today I will be talking on a joint work with my PhD student. Yes, sir.
Just sorry to disturb you. I request all the participants to mute their mic so that there won't be any disturbance. So I request all of you. Yes, sir, you can continue.
Yeah, thank you. So today I will be talking on my joint work with my PhD student, Rajat Gupta. This is on Koshlyakov zeta functions and modular relations. So this term might be new to some people. So let me first go over what will be the contents of this talk. So I will have a short section on unearthing Koshlyakov's manuscript, and it will be a personal story. So let me say more about that in the next slide. Then origin and contents of the manuscript, theory of Koshlyakov's zeta functions, new results, future directions. So let me compare this with unearthing of Ramanujan's lost notebook. I mean, this is National Mathematics Week, and tomorrow is National Mathematics Day. So it is an appropriate thing to start this talk with Ramanujan. So everybody knows that Ramanujan's lost notebook was hidden from the mathematical community for about 56 years. So when it was discovered, first of all, let me say a few things about it. It is a 138-page sheaf, loose pages. And this was what Ramanujan worked on in the last year of his life. And this discovery of lost notebook is considered to be equivalent of Beethoven's 10th Symphony. So it's a really marvelous discovery. Who made it? So Professor George Andrews from Pennsylvania State University, he discovered it in the library of Trinity College in 1976. So Ramanujan must have written it somewhere in 1919, 1920, in the last year of his life. And this was hidden about 56 years. So everybody knows the impact of the Lost Notebook. It has led to incredible advances, not only in number theory and analysis, but also in other areas of, say, sciences. Let's say, for example, in particular in physics. Now we know Mach theta functions, which Ramanujan worked on in the last year of his life, and which is there in his last letter to Hardy and also in the Lost Notebook. We have seen now connections of it in as surprising connections in as unrelated areas that one would have thought to be, as in physics, string theory, black holes, and things like that. But this was something which he worked almost 100 years back. I mean, exactly more than 100 years back. And this is now helping us in theories on black holes, string theory, and whatnot. So what I'm going to share as a personal story, it's not as charming as the Lost Notebook, but to me, it's really special. So this started in 2010. I was in 4th year of my PhD at University of Illinois, and I came across a survey article on the work of a Russian mathematician called Nikolai Sergeyevich Koshlyakov. So here is a picture of Koshlyakov teaching on the board. Koshlyakov was a mathematician who did seminal contributions in number theory and partial differential equations. So you can see the partial differential equation, the heat equation on his blackboard that he's teaching in the class. Unfortunately, much of the work done by Koshlyakov is now not known. In a way, he is neglected. But this particular talk is kind of a tribute to these stalwart mathematicians, Ramanujan, Koshlyakov, who did great work which lay hidden from the public for some years, but eventually it has to come out, right? So it so happened that I was reading this centenary article written on him, on Koshlyakov, in my 4th year of PhD thesis. And there, it had overview of the stuff done by Koshlyakov, and there seemed to be something related to what I was doing on my PhD thesis. And so at the same time, I was happy and disappointed. Disappointed, I mean, in a way, fearful that, okay, I mean, in my 4th year, what I'm doing, perhaps this guy may have already done, and then I'll be in trouble. So I decided that I will try to find everything about Koshlyakov. Whatever he has published, I will try to get a copy and then try to read all of them and check whether there is any coincidence. This was a difficult task, as I have written here, because most of his papers are in Russian and in journals which are not very easily accessible. But fortunately, the University of Illinois library was very good with all of the old volumes of almost all journals. And so it wasn't that difficult. But for some articles, it was, because most of them also had the titles themselves as Russian, and I don't know how to read Russian. But I decided that I will take help of my friends and then try to get everything that I can. So after I went over all of that, I was very happy to learn that there was no overlap between what he was doing and what I had done. But in a way, it was actually very fortunate that I discovered about this mathematician, because I came across many interesting articles which further helped my research. And while reading the survey article, I came across a very interesting piece of information. So let me read that quote which has come in that survey article. It's really very inspiring and motivating to all of us, for teachers, students alike. So, as you may be knowing, in Russia, during the Second World War, there was a repression. And it is with regards to this that the paragraph says, the repressions of the 30s, which affected scholars in Leningrad, continued even after the outbreak of the Second World War. In the winter of 1942, at the height of the blockade of Leningrad, Koshlyakov, along with a group of scientists, was arrested on fabricated dossier. so false dossier, and condemned to 10 years of correctional hard labor. After the verdict, he was exiled to one of the camps in the Urals. Urals are mountains. So there were jail camps there. On account of complete exhaustion and complicated pellagra, Koshlikov was classified as an invalid in the camp and was not sent to do any of the usual jobs, like the laborious jobs. There was very serious shortage of paper. He was forced to carry out calculations on a piece of plywood, periodically scraping off what he had written with a piece of glass. Nevertheless, between 1943 and 1944, Koshlikov wrote 2 long memoirs. So the first one is a study of some questions in the analytic theory of rational and quadratic fields. And the second one is a study of class of transcendental functions defined by the generalized Riemann equation. I mean, we seldom hear such stories like this. We frequently hear of complaints that, okay, I cannot work because maybe the AC is not working, or I don't have enough light, or whatever. But here was someone who did not even have paper to work out mathematics, and he worked it out on plywood and then scraping it by a piece of glass. And doing so, he wrote 2 manuscripts, one of which is 150 pages long. And the other one is, it met with an unfortunate fate. It was lost in transit when it was taken by jail authorities to the mathematical community. So it's very unfortunate. But I think Koshlikov recovered whatever he had thought about it in these 3 papers, because the titles look to be the same. And it's amazing to know that he could reproduce everything that he did maybe 10 years later. But the second manuscript was fortunate enough to be preserved, and it is the subject of our talk. So when I came across it, I saw in that survey article some information about what all things it contains. And it contains some modular relations of Ramanujan, and I was working on similar modular relations. That's what actually spurred me to go and look at all of the papers of Koshlikov. So after Koshlikov wrote this manuscript, he actually sent it to the Stekelov Institute of Mathematics, and he told the jailer, I mean, this is what I learned while I was reading various articles in Russian and translating them to English, that he told the jailer, please submit it to the mathematical community, it is good for science. So that was what his words were. And after this manuscript reached this top mathematicians from Russia at that time, Ian Vinogradov, Sergei Bernstein, and Yuri Linnik, they were so impressed by it that they immediately recommended publication of this manuscript. So when I found out that this is, so when I compare this to the Lost Notebook, one should really clarify, and I would like to clarify that in the case of Lost Notebook, it was not published. So it was even more significant thing. In this particular case, it was published in 1949, but again, it was unfortunate because nobody actually really studied this manuscript. There seems to be only one reference, and that too in a PhD thesis of one Russian mathematician from late 90s. And that too, just one thing that, okay, Koshlikov studied some zeta functions. That's it. I mean, not a significant systematic study of what he was trying to do. And so I was fortunate enough to work with my PhD student on this particular manuscript. And we have tried to bring this manuscript to light and the contents that it offers, and some new theories and some new results that we obtained in here. So that would be the focus of this talk. But when I came to know that this was published, the next big task was to obtain this manuscript, a hard copy or a soft copy. This was eventually easy because the UIUC math librarian, Tim Cole, told me that the Center for Research Libraries in Chicago, it has a copy of it. And I wrote an email to them, and I was just a PhD student, so I did not expect them to reply very soon. But to my surprise, they sent me the whole 150-page manuscript over email by scanning every page. And now it is available for everybody. So if you go to CRL website and search with the title of this manuscript in Russian, you will see in my paper, which is published based on this work, I have even given the link. So that was the story of this unearthing of Koshlikov's manuscript, and here is the title page. So one thing to note is that here it says N.S. Sergeev in Russian. It doesn't say N.S. Koshlikov. And the reason his identity was hidden was because if later on, when he was proved to be not guilty of charges, if everybody knew that, okay, people had put Koshlikov to jail, that would have caused problems to the political or whatever that group was at that time, which arrested scientists. So as you can see, this was published by Steklov Institute of Mathematics in Moscow, 1949. So let us look at some of the things predating this manuscript. So even though this was published in 1949, one can actually see concepts based on which the manuscript is written going on in Koshlikov's head right from 1930s, mid-1930s. So there was a paper in Math Annalen that Koshlikov wrote where clearly it is a similar setting in which he works, but not with the zeta function theory. It's with, he has the idea, basic idea, but the zeta function theory only appeared in the manuscript. So what is the genesis of this manuscript? It's a problem in physics arising from heat conduction. While I'm not a physicist, I'll attempt to say something about this problem. So if one considers a sphere of radius R2 and the radiation is occurring into the medium at 0 temperature. So initially the temperature at the surface of that sphere is 0. But what one does is one places heat sources inside that sphere of radius R2 along a sphere of radius R1. So R1 is less than R2. And let rate per unit time of heat propagation from the whole surface be Q. Then what is the problem? The problem is concerned with finding the temperature of the bigger sphere at T greater than 0. At T equal to 0, it is 0. For T greater than 0, what is the temperature? And this all boils down. I mean, people who work in heat equation may be familiar with the form of the partial differential equation that arises from here. So this partial differential equation in Koshlikov's setup is this. So this is, of course, similar to the usual heat equation, of which the solutions are the theta functions, the Jacobian theta functions. But here you have some additional parameters. So let us take K to be the thermal conductivity, H is the emissivity, C to be the specific heat, rho is the density of the material which forms the sphere. And then the relevant form of the heat equation is here. These are the initial conditions. And now one can actually check by a method of separation of variables that the characteristic equation associated with this partial differential equation is this, where P is in terms of the radius of the sphere, the emissivity, I mean not emissivity, actually, emissivity divided by thermal conductivity minus 1, and mu is its eigenvalue. I'm not very good at these concepts now. It's been a long time since I studied physics, so I don't know really some of the concepts, the emissivity and other things. I mean, some basic knowledge. But anyway, what was of interest to us was this particular transcendental equation. It forms the crux of Koshlikov's theory of zeta functions. So when he says transcendental functions defined by a generalization of functional equation of Riemann zeta function, what kind of generalization of the functional equation of the Riemann zeta function is he going to study? That is the next thing. So let us study that. But before that, it's a quick recap of the Riemann zeta function that most of us know. Still, I'll go over it. For real part of S greater than 1, the Riemann zeta function is denoted by this absolutely and uniformly convergent series, summation 1 upon n to the power s. Elsewhere in the complex plane, it can be analytically continued everywhere in the complex plane except for a simple pole at s is equal to 1. It satisfies a beautiful functional equation which was derived by Riemann. So you see here, whatever is the expression, you just change the s in there by 1 minus s and you still get the same thing. It's a beautiful relation, beautiful symmetry that you see. And here is the asymmetric form of the Riemannian equation. So these two are equivalent. One can go back and forth between the two. Sometimes this one is useful, sometimes this one is useful. Now, this brings us to some work of Hamburger. Hamburger actually gave a characterization of the Riemann-Zeta function. What did he do? Let us actually see. He considered two Dirichlet series, one associated with A of n, one associated with B of n. For students who may not have been familiar with Dirichlet series, it's a series which generalizes the concept of the Riemann-Zeta function. In that, one has summation A of n over n to the power s, where A of n is some arithmetic function, but independent of s. Okay, so every Dirichlet series has some half plane of convergence. Okay, similar to how power series have this radius of convergence, and inside that you have convergence, right? So a disk of convergence. So here the Dirichlet series have a half plane of convergence. So Hamburger said that if you consider two Dirichlet series which are absolutely convergent for large enough real part of S, there should be some abscissa of absolute convergence common for both. It may be very high number, but still it should be. And then if you consider f to be a meromorphic function of finite order, having finitely many poles, and satisfying this equation, where on one side you have f of s, and on the other side you have g of 1 minus s. So you see, what is the form of this? It's exactly same as what you have here, just that here instead of zeta of s, I'm putting f of s. Instead of g of 1 minus s, instead of zeta of 1 minus s, I'm putting g of 1 minus s. So if that is the setup, then Hamburger showed that f and g must be constant multiples of Riemann-Zeta function. It cannot be some other function which satisfies such a functional equation and yet satisfy all these properties. It has to be Riemann-Zeta function. So this is sort of a characterization, like if you all know about the theory of the gamma function, there is a similar criterion called as Bohr-Muller theorem, where if there is a function which satisfies three criteria, then f has to be nothing but a gamma function. This is a similar thing. Like if there are two functions, two Dirichlet series representations in some half plane, in right half plane, and if you have f being meromorphic function of some finite order with finitely many poles satisfying this functional equation, then the two Dirichlet series have no choice but to be constant multiples of Riemann-Zeta function. Later on, what Hamburger did is he considered an asymmetric version of this. So here is a picture of Ludwig Hamburger, Hans Ludwig Hamburger. We actually could find this is the best photograph on the internet. So later in a series of papers, he studied analytic properties of functions which are defined by the generalized functional equation, where, and again, these two this functional equations generalize that of the Riemann-Zeta function, in that here you have zeta of 1 minus s, here you have zeta of s, in the case of Riemann-Zeta function. But now he is adding one restriction. He's saying that f should be a Dirichlet series, but g need not be a Dirichlet series. And then he studied the analytic properties of f and g. But he did not give any explicit examples of f and g. And that was what Koshlikov achieved in his manuscript. So, for example, if I look at Hurwitz's formula for the Hurwitz-Zeta function, this is the Hurwitz-Zeta function, summation n equal to 0 to infinity 1 upon n plus a to the power s. If you put a equal to 1, then this is nothing but the Riemann-Zeta function. Sorry, I have a typo here. It should be zeta of s comma a. So if I take a equal to 1, then this becomes zeta of s. And this also converges absolutely for real part of s greater than 1. For real part of s greater than 1 here, but with s replaced by 1 minus s, it satisfies what is known as Hurwitz's formula. This Hurwitz formula is something really very fundamental in the theory of Hurwitz's zeta function. So when we looked at this particular one, and when we had Koshlikov's form, note that here we have zeta 1 minus s comma a, 2 cos pi s by 2, gamma of s, 2 pi to the power s. What did I have on the previous slide? I had f of 1 minus s, 2 cos pi s by 2, gamma of s, 2 pi to the power s, and times g. So exactly this form, I mean, the constants are, I mean, the expression in front of g is exactly the same. So we thought, okay, why is then there an example in the literature? Why is it that the Koshlikov zeta functions are the ones which are the first examples of such a thing, where f might be a Dirichlet series, g might not? Because here you see Hurwitz's formula. This is a Dirichlet series, a generalized Dirichlet series, and this is not. Why isn't it a Dirichlet series? Because the numerator depends on s. It's not some constant function independent of s and only depending on n divided by n to the power f. It's something which depends on s. So then isn't this an example, legitimate example of what Hamburger was trying to do? No, because this result is valid only for real part of s greater than 1 and not for all complex values of s. Whereas the one that Koshlikov gives, it has analytic continuation everywhere except for simple poles at s is equal to 1. So this explicit pair of f comma g was given by Koshlikov. And how do they look? So here is the f and here is the g. F is defined in terms of certain parameter p, and so is g defined in terms of certain parameter p. It is clearly seen that this is not a Dirichlet series because the top one depends on s. But this one is a generalized Dirichlet series. How? It won't be clear until I tell you what these lambda j's are, because I'm summing over j equal to 1 to infinity, but the things that are involving j are not j itself, but some functions of j. So these lambda j's are solutions of this transcendental equation. And this transcendental equation is exactly the same one which occurred in physics. I think somebody wants to, somebody's saying. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. So lambda j. I'm hearing an echo. Is it? Yeah, Professor Joshi, can I start again?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Dixit, your mic is off.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, so what I was saying was we are summing over j going from 1 to infinity. But what are these lambda j's? These are positive real roots of the characteristic equation, which was the same as in the physical setup, the problem arising from heat conduction, up to some trivial change. Like I had here, I think s or something, and s is taken to be pi lambda, or I mean, it's exactly the same one. You look at the roots of this transcendental equation, those turn out to be, the positive real roots turn out to be lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda 3, and then you sum over this. So previously, people have worked on similar such things. I mean, not previously. I think Koshlikov was the earliest person to work on this. Maybe Hardy or other people have done a similar thing, but not exactly as in what Koshlikov has done, to the effect that people take these to be, rather than just lambda j's being j, they take it to be some function of j, which is quite simple, like root j or things of that kind. But something coming as solutions of transcendental equation, that was done for the first time by Koshlikov. Later on, if you see some papers by Chandrasekharan and Narasimhan, they also have some similar setup on generalized Dirichlet series, but I mean, not similar as in this, but similar in the setup of Hardy. And also some people, some physicists have worked on problems in elasticity, where they actually look at these lambda j's to be real roots of some other transcendental equations. But this is late 60s. So Koshlikov seems to be the first person to have worked on this type of thing. And note that, I mean, I'm not going into the details, but it can be seen that if we let p tend to infinity, this p parameter, then the lambda j's actually tend to j. And when p tends to 0, lambda j's tend to j minus half. And for all other values of p, they are in between this j minus half and j. So they are in the open interval j minus half comma j. How does one see that? It's not difficult. You write this in the form like tan of pi lambda is equal to minus lambda over p. And then if you look at p tending to infinity, what will you get? Tan pi lambda is equal to 0. So the solutions must be when sin pi lambda is equal to 0, and those are nothing but when lambda themselves are all j. So lambda j's are j. And then what happens when you have tan of pi lambda equal to minus lambda over p and you let p tend to 0? You get infinity. So from there, you will be getting the answer when cosine pi j cosine pi lambda becomes 0, and that is when lambda is j minus r. So it's easy to see this. But then one nice thing that happens is that if I look at this and I let p tend to infinity, so divide this both numerator and denominator by p square, as p tends to infinity, this approaches 1, lambda j approach j, and so we get summation 1 upon j to the power s, which is nothing but Riemann zeta function, zeta of s. If you look at what happens when p tends to 0, then this thing just becomes 1, and here it is j minus half to the power s. And so if you just do some simple manipulation, it will give you 2 to the power s minus 1 times zeta of s. So this is as far as zeta sub p, the first of the two Koshlyakov zeta functions, is concerned. What happens when p tends to infinity and p tends to 0? This is what it reduces to. What about the other one? The second one linked with the functional equation, which is defined in this way. If you take p tending to infinity, what happens? What is this function? This is defined in terms of an integral. So when I'm looking at nu be 2 pi p, so I take 2 pi p here. Again, let us divide both sides by p in here, and then I let p tend to infinity. So it just reduces to e raised to minus x times x to the s minus 1, 0 to infinity, which is nothing but gamma of s over gamma of s, that is 1. So this is 1 upon k to the power s, that is nothing but, again, Riemann zeta function. And what happens when I take p to be equal to 0? If that means nu is 0, that means this is 0. So I get a minus 1 from here. So minus 1 to the power k, and times again 1 upon gamma s times gamma s. So minus 1 to the power k over k to the power s, and that gives me this one. So essentially, what am I trying to hint at is that these particular Koshlyakov zeta functions are actually generalizing the theory of the Riemann zeta function. In the special case, when we let p tends to infinity and p tends to 0, we get results involving the zeta function itself. While p tends to infinity gives us known results, p tends to 0, even though it reduces to almost Riemann zeta function, it almost always gives us new results. So that's the very nice thing about it. And plus, for other values of p, of course, once you have a result involving a general parameter p, you have a result for infinitely many values of p, right? All real values. Okay, so let me briefly say what Koshlyakov did. So he showed that both these zeta functions, which we call as Koshlyakov zeta functions, they can be analytically continued in the entire complex plane. Both have a simple pole at s is equal to 1, but the residues for zeta sub p of s is 1, and that for eta sub p of s is this. So again, if you let p tend to infinity, this reduces to 1, and that is why zeta of s has a simple pole at s is equal to 1 with residue 1. So these two Koshlyakov zeta functions are linked by means of this functional equation, because it came as a problem to give explicit examples of a functional equation of this type. So they ought to satisfy this functional equation. So Koshlyakov does this thing in his paper, that he shows that, okay, if you take these two things, then they do satisfy this functional equation which you wanted. So with this setup, Koshlyakov constructs the whole theory of his zeta functions and the functions associated to them. So there are generalized gamma functions. He calls them as gamma morphic functions, and there are two of them. Then he calls generalized Euler constants. So generalizations of gamma, the Euler constant. There are two of them. Generalized Bernoulli polynomials, generalized theta functions, generalized Hurwitz zeta function. There are summation formulas like generalized Poisson summation formula or generalized Abel-Plana summation formula. So it's a beautiful manuscript of over 150 pages. And my PhD student fortunately translated the whole manuscript for us from Russian to English, Rajat. And then we started examining the manuscript and started building up results further, which are new. So why two gamma functions? Why two Euler constants? This is because we have two zeta functions. The Koshlyakov zeta functions are 2 in number, right? So corresponding to each of them, there are associated gamma functions, associated Euler constants, etc. So let me briefly tell you the contents from his manuscript. So zeta sub p of s we showed we discussed that it has a simple pole at s is equal to 1. So how does the Lorentz series expansion look like? It's here. as in the case of the zeta function, the zeta sub p of s has as its constant term the generalized Euler constant Cp1, which is defined in this way. And eta sub p of s also has this particular thing. Note that the residue is 1 upon 1 plus 1 upon pi p as at s is equal to 1, not 1 as in the case in here. And then there is the second generalized Euler constant, but then one has to actually take into account this as the constant term. And what is this Q function? It's an incomplete gamma function. Okay, incomplete gamma function is where there are two incomplete gamma functions actually, one from 0 to mu and then other from mu to infinity. Koshlikov gives Weierstrass product representations for his gamma morphic functions. So this is for the first one in terms of, so if you have seen for the usual gamma function, it has e to the minus gamma x over x times this certain product. Here the gamma is replaced by the generalized gamma or the generalized Euler constant. And so it is evident that when one lets p tends to infinity, this will reduce to gamma of s, this will reduce to gamma. Then he also considers logarithmic derivative of this gamma 1 comma p of x, gives the series representation for it. Everywhere here, if you let p tends to infinity, you will recover the known results. But the power of Koshlikov's thinking and his analytical capacity is that he is developing all of this when he is in jail and all by himself. I mean, he had only, I think, the access to Watson's book on special functions. I mean, Whittaker and Watson, the famous book, and some of his papers. So other than that, he was all by himself with serious shortage of paper and yet discovering these fascinating things. He also gave a representation for this psi, the logarithmic derivative of gamma function or gamma morphic function. Why am I discussing only these ones as opposed to all of these? Is because these ones are going to turn up in our work, our further work on his manuscript. So this psi 1 comma p of x is defined in this way, where I1 is this integral and the sigma of t, even though there isn't a dependence of p in the notation, sigma of t is a function of p and t. It's p plus t upon p minus t. So for example, if one lets p tends to infinity, then you divide both sides by p and then let p tend to infinity, you get 1. And this is then a familiar result. Similarly, one starts with gamma 2 comma p of x has a Weierstrass product expansion. It's slightly more complicated because here you are taking derivative of this function which I introduced when I was discussing eta sub p of s. But all of this is done explicitly in all rigor, and then the logarithmic derivative associated with gamma 2 comma p is also given, a series representation for it as well as integral representation for it. And one function which turns up in the integral representation is this sigma sub p of t. Note that on the previous slide it was just sigma of t, and that sigma of t was just p plus t by p minus t. But here it is sigma sub p of t, and that is defined in this way. Okay, one or two more slides and then I'll turn to the work that we have done. So this is the functional equation as I said before. But isn't there a symmetric version like we have for the Riemann zeta function? One can get a symmetric function, but then one has to add the two zeta functions. It's like taking their average. But by doing so, we get a symmetric version, which is very nice. But by doing so, note that we cannot say now that this is a functional equation relating Dirichlet series. I mean, at least when real part of s is greater than 1, also this is not a Dirichlet series because eta is not a Dirichlet series, even though zeta is a Dirichlet series. So things become now complicated. So this one can easily check. So back to the Riemann zeta function case, one calls such a thing as a completed Riemann zeta function because one has now made it entire function of s by killing the pole of zeta of s at s is equal to 1 by multiplying it by s minus 1, and by killing the pole of the gamma at s is equal to 0 by multiplying it by s. Note that apart from this s minus 1 over 2, all of the rest of the things are what occurred in the symmetric version of Riemann's functional equation. 2 is just there for normalization purpose. And then when you evaluate this on the critical line, real s equal to 1/2, that is where you call such a function as cap c of t. Ramanujan, in one of his published papers on Riemann zeta function, he considers some beautiful modular transformations. What do I mean by modular transformations? On one side, you have something involving alpha, and on the other side, you have something involving A and B, where A times B is some constant. And this is very much, or this is in fact equivalent to what one gets in inversion in modular transformations. When one looks at modular forms, let's say on SL2Z, you are looking at the inversion. What is the inversion of the form? It's f of -1 by z is z to the power k times f of z, where k is the weight of the modular form. And this z going into -1 by z is equivalent in this particular case to A going into some constant over B. Here we are taking them to be such that they have real parts positive, whereas in the case of modular forms, we only work with upper half plane. So one can always back and forth go from the right half plane to the imaginary half plane, the upper half plane, sorry. And so it's equivalent concept. So Ramanujan got this identity, but look at the beauty. If you show something like this is equal to this integral involving the Riemann C function, the only place in here, in the whole integral where you have an A is here. And if you replace this A by B and make use of the simple log property, that log of 1 by A is minus log of A, and then make use of the fact that cos is an even function of its argument, then this remains invariant even if you replace A by B. By constant times B, so that you get here. Generally we work with AB equal to 1. So in that case, it is easy to see. But here also, just by taking alpha A to be in terms of B, some constant times B, you will see that it is invariant, and one gets this the equality, the modular transformation for free once one proves this is equal to this. So Koshlyakov considered the corresponding completed zeta functions associated with omega p of s. Omega p, as I defined earlier, is the average of the two Koshlyakov zeta functions. So it's not a Dirichlet series, even when real part of s is greater than 1. And he actually generalized the formula of Ramanujan. So where you have this particular modular transformation, and here you have this completed Koshlyakov zeta function. Okay, and it is in this regard that I was really fascinated, because this is the last chapter of Koshlyakov's manuscript, and it is fully devoted to that published paper of Ramanujan, generalize those results. And it is in that connection that I first came across this work of Koshlyakov, because this formula from the lost notebook of Ramanujan was what I was working on in my PhD thesis, and its extensions and generalizations. So seeing something like this in Koshlyakov's manuscript had almost a heart attack for me. And I was very afraid that perhaps he was doing what I had already done, but fortunately he had not. So it is in this regard that I would like to build our first new result in Koshlyakov theory. So by the way, Professor Joshi, how much time do I have?
So you have 20 minutes around.
20 minutes? Okay. Sure. Thank you. Yeah. So let us look at this formula. Why is it really nice? What Ramanujan is doing is he is taking the logarithmic derivative of gamma function and then subtracting from it the first two terms in its asymptotic expansion as extends to infinity. So how does psi of x behave as extends to infinity? If you look at its asymptotic expansion, the first term is minus 1 by 2x. That's why I'm saying subtracting that minus 1 by 2x, so that one gets plus 1 by 2x. And the second term is plus log x, so it becomes minus log x. And then how does the rest of the term look in the asymptotic expansion? One can really say that it is big O of 1 by x squared. So really this phi of x which he has constructed, it's nothing but big O of 1 by x squared. And then, because it is big O of 1 by x squared, when I replace this x by n alpha, it will be big O of 1 by n square alpha square. And so one can take summation of that and it will be an absolutely convergent series. So that's what he constructs. And then there are some residual terms that he puts and then multiplies it by root alpha and says that, okay, you get the same thing when you replace alpha by beta, where alpha times beta is equal to 1. So this is an example of a modular transformation or a modular relation. And not only that, he says that, okay, these two expressions are equal to this particular integral involving this completed Riemann zeta function. So this formula is very dear to my heart, and maybe I will just explain in 2 minutes how I really came across it. So when I was in my, when I had just completed my second year of PhD, and it was summer of 2008, and there was a lecture by Professor Bruce Byrne on unsolved problems in Ramanujan's lost notebook. And I had seen that email, but I had forgotten about it. And I was going to my office completely in oblivion to this lecture. And I met another fellow PhD student who was a student of Professor Bruce Byrne himself. He told me, aren't you coming to this class? And that's when it struck me that, oh, I have this lecture of Professor Byrne that I was going to miss. And when I went to that lecture, one of the problems that he had written was this one. And at that time, I was really very, very fond of gamma function. I'm still very fond of gamma function and psi functions. And when I looked at this problem, I said to myself that I should stop everything that I'm doing up to now and just concentrate on solving this problem, because this is an unsolved problem, and that too involving something that I like, gamma function. But I was very, very unfamiliar with this sort of thing. And my first reaction after seeing such an integral was, oh, what a complicated integral this is. But later on, when I worked on it and I was able to solve this problem, I understood the beauty of this, and I'm still very thankful to that fellow PhD student of who actually told me to come to this lecture, because even now I'm working on things related which have origins in this formula, various generalizations, and I have really been fortunate enough to work on this and its generalizations. So later, Professor Brent and I together wrote a paper where we explained some of the things in a nicer way. I mean, some of my proofs were longer, and then we found a shorter way to do it. And he was the one who actually first showed me that, okay, you don't have to prove it twice. You just prove this is equal to this, that's it. Because you replace alpha by 1 by alpha, which is beta, then log 1 by alpha is minus log alpha, and cos of minus theta is cos theta. So you get the same thing, but on the left-hand side, you have replaced alpha by beta. So you get this for free. And that was a beautiful idea that I really like. And once one has this transformation, then our first thing in the to-do list after reading Koshlikov's theory was to try to extend it in the setting of Koshlikov zeta functions. So let me explain the hypothesis. So capital phi sub p of x is written as sum of these phi 1 comma p of x plus phi of 2 comma p of x. What are these things? These are in terms of this logarithmic derivatives that I defined before, and similar type of construction as Ramanujan did here. So you take this, look at its asymptotic expansion, subtract the first two terms in its asymptotic expansion, then you get something which is big O of 1 by x squared. Similar thing happens in here, although the expressions now are somewhat more complicated. Then you have this extended Euler's constants, which I had defined before. They also have these integral representations. But one integral representation that we really needed to make this generalization work was not in Koshlikov's work. And this is what we found out. It is for the second Euler constant. And then the main result here is that we have infinite family of transformation formulas of the type of Ramanujan. For any real positive number p, we have this result. Again, the similar symmetry that one has. This phi sub p is in terms of this addition of these two functions which are defined in this way. And one constructs an infinite series regarding that. Here are the two generalized Euler constants, some residual terms here. You see the perfect symmetry as was evident even in Ramanujan's case. So this paper recently appeared in Advances of Mathematics. In fact, the publication date is 24th of December, so 3 days from now, but it has appeared online. And it is also equal to this particular integral. Now, let me tell you the difficulty in conceiving such a result. So if one goes back to Koshlikov's modular relation, for example, this one, see, this was a generalization of Ramanujan's modular relation, which was this one, and here it was cap C function. And what Koshlikov did was he kept everything the same, but he put a sub P and considered his more general version of this cap C function, which is in terms of his Koshlikov zeta functions. So our first thought while working on this formula is that, okay, here it's C of t by 2 whole square. Note that this is a real valued function, so one can actually take it outside of the modulus. So it's really the square of C of t by 2. So what would be our first thought? Okay, put sub p in there and then work with it. But then it is a problem. We soon thought that, okay, this is going to be a problem because this C sub p of t by 2 squared, once you square it, the associated Dirichlet series, let's say in the terms of Riemann zeta function, will involve d of n, divisor function. Here, you don't have a Dirichlet series. And then how can one actually get the coefficient? And so it was all of a problem because one is squaring it. And so we decided that, okay, let us try to work from the left-hand side of Ramanujan's result and try to see by arguing in a similar way as we had done before, whether we could actually put the pieces of the puzzle together. And that's how it started. I don't think I have time for proofs, but let me just only very briefly mention that after we prove the uniform and absolute convergence of all the involved series in there, one starts with this. One gets an integral representation in here, but note that in order to make things work, when we have phi sub 1 comma p, one has to take the second Euler's constant. And then when you take this two together, then one gets a nice integral representation. But then our capital phi function was phi sub 1 comma p plus phi 2 comma p. So if I want phi of 2 comma p, then I have to do the similar game. Like instead of CP2, I have to now take CP1. So then one gets again an integral representation and one adds these two. Then now it is symmetric, right? There is CP1, CP2, there is phi 1p, phi 2 comma p. So once you do all of that, one gets this whole expression represented as sum of two integrals. And one of these integrals generalizes a result of Ramanujan. And the other integral, this g of alpha, turns out to be simply 0 from my previous work with Professor Bruce Byrne. And that's how one proves the result. But while doing so, we realize that the integral involving the C function that one gets doesn't have P on both, as we were trying to do initially, but P only in one of them. And that was the thing that we probably could not have realized unless we had not worked from the other side. Now that one has that it is P only on one of them, for any other functions replacing this gamma, one can actually work with the same idea. Okay, so that proves this result. I gave a very brief sketch of it. But what happens when one lets P tends to 0? As I said before, when P tends to 0, the lambda j is actually 10 to j minus half. And so one gets a new formula. When one looks at this new formula, if I keep above the formula of Ramanujan, you will be very surprised that the only difference is that there is a 2 in Ramanujan's formula, which is not in here, except everything is same. I mean, here in the residual terms. But this tau function is now completely different. It involves now 3 psi functions. And here also there is some change. So this is a beautiful transformation that we get for free as we let p tend to 0. And it's a new one. Now let me turn gears and switch to the second new result that we obtained, and it is generalizing another formula of Ramanujan. This is a famous formula of Ramanujan for odd zeta values. What does it say? If you have m to be any non-zero integer, you take alpha beta such that the real parts are positive, and alpha times beta is equal to pi square. Again, this is a requirement. This is equivalent to saying z going into -1 by z. Okay. Then what is Ramanujan saying? If you take this expression involving odd zeta value, replace in there alpha by beta, and one has to take -1 to the -m or -1 to the m also in there. Then this is almost always, I mean, not almost always, this is almost equal, but when it's not really, because one has this obstruction to modularity in terms of this finite sum of Bernoulli numbers. So this is a very important theorem of Ramanujan. It gives as a special cases some really fundamental transformations in the theory of modular forms. So if you consider modular forms on SL to Z, then when you take m to be negative numbers starting from -2, -3, -4, then this gives transformation formulas for Eisenstein series. When one takes m to be equal to -1, this gives transformation formula for E2 of Z, the quasi-modular form. When one takes m to be positive natural numbers, like starting from m equal to 1, 2, 3, and so on, then one gets transformation formulas for Eichler integrals corresponding to Eisenstein series on SL to Z. And when one takes m equal to 0, not in here, because of course zeta function has a pole, but this series is still well defined. So if you take m equal to 0, one can actually work out, and then it is related to the transformation formula satisfied by Dedekind eta function. Like people in modular forms are familiar with eta of -1 by z is square root of -I times z times eta of z. That is something that one would get when one works with this series with m equal to 0. Okay, so then the natural thing is, okay, what are the generalizations of this for zeta sub p and eta sub p? So note that I introduced these two functions previously, this function previously. When one lets p tends to infinity, this becomes 1 and this becomes j, and so you have e to the minus jt, which is nothing but 1 upon e to the t minus 1 by geometric series formula. Koshlikov had another function. Recall that sigma of t would be p plus t by p minus t. So this also reduces to 1 upon e to the t minus 1 as p tends to infinity. But when p tends to 0, this reduces to almost the sine hyperbolic t by 2, reciprocal of that. And here this reduces to -1 by e to the t plus 1. So here is our generalization of Ramanujan's formula for the first of the two Koshlikov zeta functions, zeta sub p. These are the associated Lambert series that one gets, and here the finite sum involving Bernoulli numbers gets generalized to finite sum involving p analogs of Bernoulli numbers, the generalized Bernoulli numbers which are defined in this way. Okay. As before, if we let p tends to infinity, we will recover Ramanujan's formula. If we let p tends to 0, we get a result which has been rediscovered many times. So initially it seems to be first done by Malurkar, then by Professor Berndt, then myself and Rajat Gupta in this paper, we rediscovered it. And very recently, in fact, the paper came just yesterday or day before yesterday on arXiv by Shashi Chaurashia, Muhammad Kashif Jamal, and Vivekananda Majhi. So it has been rediscovered many times. This is a beautiful result where, so one can get this as a special case, because when you let p tends to 0, you know that lambda j tends to j minus half, and then zeta sub 0 would be zeta of s comma half. One can also write it explicitly in terms of the Riemann zeta function. So one gets this. Let me very briefly say about the analog of the transformation formula for log of the Dedekind eta function. It is this formula that one gets. And again, when we let p tends to infinity, one gets the transformation for log of Dedekind eta function. P tends to 0 gives new identity. And when I say new in this particular case, I should say maybe in quotes, but I mean, we tried to the best of our knowledge, we couldn't find it in the literature. Then for P less than -1, it gives this generalization of transformation for Eisenstein series. And when one takes M to be an even positive integer in here, so that it is odd, and -1 to the odd number will be minus. And if one takes alpha and beta both be equal to pi, because alpha times beta is pi square, so then this will be just minus of this. And so when you take it on the other side, one gets an explicit evaluation of this Lambert series in terms of the special value of zeta sub p, but unfortunately one doesn't have a closed form evaluation of this. One has to keep it in terms of zeta sub p. Further specializations one gets in here. Let me say about m equal to -1 case, that is the analog of the quasi-modular transformation for E2, and that's quasi-modularity is coming from this extra function in here. So anyway, let me just say that the nice thing to note that this series is a transcendental number, but when we consider this only with j replaced by 2j minus 1, it is a rational number. That's a special thing. Okay, this is our second main theorem. Again, the generalization of Ramanujan's formula. Let me skip some of the details because, but as a special case of that, we also get some new results involving zeta 4m plus 3. And again, to the best of our knowledge, we could not find them in the literature. So in concluding in just 2-3 minutes, let me say that we have merely scratched the tip of the iceberg in this Koshlikov theory. This Koshlikov theory was dormant from 60 to 70 years on the mathematical community. So from 1949 until when I discovered it in 2010, but I did not start working on it until last year with my PhD student in 2020. So there are many fundamental questions which are still unanswered. So Koshlikov himself showed in the manuscript that for every positive real number p, zeta sub p of s and eta sub p of s both have trivial zeros. I should say here trivial zeros at negative even integers minus 2k, as is the case with the Riemann zeta function. But what about the non-trivial zeros? No mention in Koshlikov's work. He also generalized Euler's formula. See, Euler's formula is to give the even zeta values, zeta of 2k, in terms of Bernoulli numbers, even index Bernoulli numbers. That formula is generalized here in Koshlikov's work. And he uses this along with the functional equation to then say that, okay, eta sub p of 1 minus 2k is nothing but this Bernoulli. But now one can say, okay, what about eta sub p of 2k? And then what about zeta sub p of minus 2k minus 1? One does not have them. I mean, there is no analog of Euler's formula in Koshlikov's work for eta, and also for this particular one. Once you get it for this, you'll do it for this just by functional equation. Why is it not feasible? Perhaps the difficulty is because of the fact that eta sub p of s is not a Dirichlet series, whereas zeta sub p of s is. That's why we also could not find a Ramanujan formula associated with odd zeta values in the setting of eta sub p of s. We only did it for zeta sub p of s. So it may be an interesting thing to look at the closed form evaluations. The same thing that I just now said. We don't have a formula for eta sub p 2k plus 1 as of yet. And then non-trivial zeros. So let me just say, conclude in 1 minute by saying that from our first main theorem, generalizing a formula in Lost Notebook of Ramanujan, we got this result. See, it involves this cos 1/2 t log alpha and then cos 1/2 t log 2. So if I take alpha to be equal to 2, then this gives us cos square. See, everything is positive in the integrand. And so the value of this integral is also positive. So that gives us for free some really nice inequalities involving this digamma function. Just for free, because the right hand side is positive. From there we get these inequalities. So there are a lot of things in this theory which also give new results in the theory of the Riemann zeta function when we let p tend to 0. And with that, I will end. Thank you.
Any questions? Any
Yeah,
questions to the?
Yes, there is one hand is raised. So, yes, sir. Please, sir.
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Hi.
Yeah. So this is Vivekananda. Okay. First, I'd like to thank Professor Dixit for giving wonderful talk. Yeah, we can clearly see that this is the beginning of this theory you have started. So there are a lot of things. I'm sure that a lot of things are going to come in future. Okay. So I want to ask a few questions. So can you, Professor Dixit, can you go to page 22?
Okay. Yes. Here.
Yeah. So as far I understood that zeta p and eta p, like when we are summing those two things, then we are getting this WP. Okay, and it has nice functional equation. It's quite similar to the Riemann zeta function. But you have mentioned that this WP is not a Dirichlet series.
Right.
So that's why we cannot use Hamburger's result to claim that WP is something like a multiple of zeta S.
Yes, because his basic question itself starts from, okay, you have a functional equation. Now I want one of them to be a Dirichlet series. The other one need not be. And
Yes.
so that is here it was F, which was a Dirichlet series, and here he has G, which he says need not be a Dirichlet series. So Koshlikov's question was, okay, what is the fundamental, what is the first example of this? There are no examples in the literature. So that's what led him to this. Yeah.
Okay, I see. So, but like when p tends to 0, then where this WP goes to zeta S, p
Yeah.
tends to 0 and p tends to infinity?
It's this. Yeah.
Okay. I can. Yeah, from in my computer, I was not able to see actually. Okay, yeah, I can clear. Okay. So that's nice. So, and one more question that, like for zeta p, you have Koshlikov has mentioned Euler's formula, analogous Euler's formula, but for eta p, there is no such Euler's formula. Okay.
No.
But now my question is that whether a similar analogous, yes, right. So whether similar analogous formula is exist for WP at even values.
So if there exists a formula for WP, then of course one will be able to get it for eta p, right? Because
okay, right.
omega p is nothing but the average of the two.
Yes, right.
So finding a analogous formula for omega p would be as difficult as that.
Yeah, I understood. Yeah, right. You are absolutely correct. Okay. So and then again, in the negative odd integer also there is a difficulty is there.
Yeah. So we tried this, but then the difficulty is that you cannot, when you use the theory of Mellin transforms, then that very definition of eta sub p of s involves this function on the top which is dependent on s.
Yes, yeah, I actually now I understood that because you have mentioned that functional equation eta p at 1 minus s is connected, zeta p at 1 minus s is connected with eta p at s.
Yes.
So like eta p at even values is connected with the zeta p at odd, negative odd values. So both are actually difficult now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there also if we have one of them, then we'll be able to get the other.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So yeah, another question I have on page 25.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. So here in the right hand side, that might be there might be little typo, psi of n comma beta in the
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So here like when you define phi function, phi of x, like you have taken the two main term for the asymptotic expansion of psi x. right? So then is it possible, like if you take one more term, like then the next term 1 by x square or some constant times. So if you take that term and then if you define another function, okay.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I don't think anybody has done it.
Okay, I see. Mhm. See, because the convergence will be, everything will be there. Right?
Yeah, right. It will be big O of 1 upon x cube.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to see, whether that gives you some kind of a transformation.
Yeah, so that then in general, like we can take any number of terms and then, yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thanks for it.
Any other question from any other?
Yeah, I have a question. So when you said you don't know about the non-trivial zeros, is there a critical strip that you expect it to be, or is that also not known?
So my student Rajat and I, we are working on the analog of Hardy's theorem on infinitely many zeros on the critical line. But it's just in the beginnings. And so one has to really see whether that critical strip, I mean, it must be a function of P then now. I mean, whether it, like when you change P, the strip might change. So we are really in the beginning stages of that thing. We don't have any concrete result as of yet.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, any other? Any other member would like to ask the question? I hope now sir has cleared all the doubts of all the participants, those who feel that we have doubts. Actually, sir, this is very surprising. I'm the first time I'm meeting a person who is actually working on Ramanujan. I had some mail conversation with Bruce Bundt sir few years back, but this is the first time I'm meeting a person who is actually thinking in the line of Ramanujan. So, very congratulations for getting Swarna Jayanti Fellowship for this year, first of all. And thanks a lot for being a very nice lecture. I hope everybody liked it. And certainly, if you come to Pune, please call us at least once so that we will meet and we will have some discussion over it.
Sure.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Dr.
Joshi, sir, would you like to add something?
Yes, just I would like to thank on behalf of Department of Mathematics, Savitribai Phule Pune University, for accepting our invitation to deliver the very first lecture on this National Mathematics Day celebration. Thank you, sir. And we hope that, yes, in forthcoming days, definitely we will have some offline lectures too.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sir,